7 weeks ago, I experienced what I called a creative crisis of faith. At the time, I utilized several of the life-changing tools I've discovered that assist me in times of emotional, philosophical, or creative crisis. The result was I thought I had dealt with the matter at hand, I had regained my literary faith, and I was boldly pushing forward yet again. And that was true, except it also wasn't quite true. I'll tell you more about this on this special episode of the Million Words Project. Welcome to the Million Words Project. I'm Eric Sheridan Wyatt. I'm an author, writing instructor, and creativity coach. 20 weeks ago, I challenged myself to write 1 million new words in 12 months. And each week I check in here to give an update on my progress toward 1 million words. And I share a little bit about the ups and downs of my creative life. The format of this episode is going to differ from what I normally do. I had some difficult moments in the last 2 weeks, and I wanted to share that with you without the restrictions of a typical video format. So that's what I'm going to do. I expect if you've watched the other videos in this series, you'll be okay with a slight modification. And if you're new here, consider checking out the other videos. But just know that they are a little less intense than this one, and a little more applicable to a wider audience, I think. Now, before we get too far along, I will briefly fill you in on my writing progress for these 2 weeks. My combined 2-week total for new words written was just over 46,000 words, which is 6,000 above the minimum pace to reach my target of 1 million words. The distribution of words was pretty typical in some ways, although I did make one major change to my focus, which has resulted in some interesting changes and challenges. And I'll talk more about that in a future episode. This week, though, I'm going to skip over the details of my writing life and talk about the deeper work I've been doing. Journaling at the end of week 18, I wrote the following. Today, I am imagining a point around this time next year, when autumn is fading and the long dark is soon upon us, when I am looking back at this next year and am as happy as with my further progress as I am this year. I was at this point almost 1/3 of the way through this year-long challenge, and I compared myself to where I was at this time in 2021, and I was quite pleased. It had been 6 months since I was struggling to kick myself into a higher gear and came up with 2 ideas or concepts to frame my creative life going forward. One of those was the Million Words Project, and the other concept is the Self-Reclamation Project. If you've watched any of these videos, you understand the Million Words Project. The Self-Reclamation Project is an umbrella term I use for proactively developing habits and practices for an ongoing, sustained, and intentional self-evolution and self-improvement. I won't get lost in the weeds trying to explain either of these 2 projects at this point. The key piece of information is that I'm focused on recognizing a point of contention in my day-to-day life and exploring and developing ways to address it. Sometimes, though, despite all the progress, despite all the evidence for growth, I feel like the princess in the pea. No matter how many mattresses of healthy habits and practices I pile on the irritants in my life, I know that pea is still there. Most of the time, I can deal with this irritability with rationality and logic. Real progress is slow. It takes 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But then there are times when rationality flees and I'm left with an unbridled, almost primal emotional reaction that has roots hidden deep within the subconscious. Week 13 of this project was one of those times. I detailed it in the episode called Too Many Pieces, Too Little Time, and I'll link to it if you're interested. The synopsis of that episode is this. The data showed I was making solid progress. Despite that, I was overcome with an existential dread, a creative crisis of faith, if you will, that none of this really matters. And I was no better off working toward my creative goals than I would be lounging around on the couch or working in a fast food restaurant. The way I worked through those feelings was by employing several of the techniques and practices I've utilized over the years. I put that crisis of week 13 behind me and I dove back into the work, but then when I got to week 19 and started to write the video script to share about week 13, I was overcome once again with the feeling that none of my progress really matters. I hit a wall of anxiety and I hit it pretty hard. My inner voice was relentless. It was questioning the value of doing any of the work I do and poking holes in my creative, philosophical, and spiritual framework. There was a lot of questioning of my self-worth and of my value, and it drained me. Luckily, I have a method of addressing that sort of thing. I call it writing out loud. There's another video about it you can find. It's the update for week 7 called Am I Writing Too Loudly? And I'll link to it in the notes as well. I sat down and knocked out 4,000 words about what I was feeling and what the arguments were, pro and con, to support what I was feeling. What I realized was twofold. First, when I had come to terms with this feeling of creative existential dread in week 13, I hadn't quite uncovered the deeper roots of the problem. And because I hadn't addressed those deeper roots, the issue resurfaced. Second, I came to understand that what I was responding to with these feelings of dread was rooted in my subconscious and tied to past behavior. I could talk for an hour or more about some of the specifics of all of this, but instead, I'll try to break it down into a couple of bite-sized chunks. The core of the problem is that for many years, decades even, I was living a very unbalanced life creatively. I was stuck in my head. I had ideas and made plans for all of the amazing creative work I wanted to do, but I rarely followed through. I often made the mistake of thinking I needed to do just a little more research, just a little more reading, a little more planning, and I would do a lot of writing-related activities, but I didn't actually write anything. And in the weeks between week 13 and week 20, I had started a whole new organization and productivity plan, and I had begun a new initiative within this Million Words project called Fiction First. And this is the real kicker. I had come up with several other projects, books, and initiatives that I added to my ever-growing list of things I hoped to accomplish. You see, the whole point of the Million Words project was originally to consistently show myself data, to prove that I wasn't slacking. But at 1/3 of the way through, I was also amending the purpose of continuing the project to also use that data to help me find better balance and increase my proficiency towards realizing actual, tangible, and real-world goals. The Million Words project has been so successful at getting me moving again, it actually had triggered a secondary effect. It stirred up more and more ideas and new ways to do things and products and books and services I could offer. All of that tied in with all of the very deep and very heavy self-evaluation that I'm doing with my deep writing in the Life Document project had excavated a lot of new ideas. When I began to accumulate idea after idea, my subconscious panicked. It was worried that I was slipping back into the old habits. Yes, I was racking up words for the Million Words goal, but I wasn't making much progress, actual progress, when it came to the tangible physical products. The ideas were outpacing the execution once again, and my subconscious freaked out. The issue uncovered is a lack of trust in myself, to not revert to my headspace exclusivity. The fact that I've improved on many of these fronts does not wipe away the decades of having been mired in knowledge hoarding and perfectionism. Or, as I wrote in my Writing Out Loud session, it is an inner, lingering fear of reverting back, even as I'm progressing forward. My anxiety was an inner rebellion. Thankfully, as I worked through all of this, I came to realize, not just intellectually, but in my felt and experienced reality, that in fact, the methods and tools I have in place are actually working. I wrote in my journal, the conclusion I drew in the Writing Out Loud exercise was that the systems I have put in place for continued growth are working. Not saying they're flawless or that I can't improve, but definitely something positive and helpful. What had seemed like a wall was actually an opportunity that I didn't consciously understand. What I believe to be true about my life is not always fully realized in the day-to-day. And like any other belief, it often wavers and wobbles. By recognizing the anxiety and digging back into it, I was able to actually address the underlying fears and worries. I was able to show myself these things work because I actually experienced them working. I presented my disbelief with a tangible, actual, concrete working through of the issues, and I was able to take a deep breath and get back to work. And get back to work I did, indeed. And I did so with a very specific intention to address the idea of increasing my focus on the productive output that is actually seeing some of the ideas I've had come to life, and not just remain projects I will get to someday. I'll share more about that in the new year, because this is the last video I will be posting in 2022. And I'm going to take a couple of weeks of hiatus. Writing, filming, and editing these videos does take a significant portion of my time, so I'm giving myself a little break. I anticipate having the next update ready to go on January 12th or 19th, so I will see you then. Now, if you made it this far, I want to say thanks for listening. I'd be happy to hear if this episode resonated with you in any way, but mostly I recorded this for me. If it helped you, though, I would love it if you left a comment or connect with me via the other methods listed in the show notes. Until next year, remember, small steps lead to big results. Oh, and your words matter. Make them count.